Learn to measure stitch and row gauge accurately in double crochet.
I'll be using American crochet terminology throughout.
Before we can measure gauge in double crochet, we first need to recognize what a double crochet stitch looks like. The right side of a double crochet has two little legs that go down into the stitch that it was worked into, these two little legs right here. There's a diagonal bar, it may look a little horizontal to you, that's the yarn over. And then you have the top of the stitch, which is formed like a sideways V. It's pretty easy to recognize a double crochet because it has this strong vertical component called a post. So the vertical part of the stitch is called the post of the stitch. The wrong side of a double crochet is a little bit bumpier. I'm going to turn this around and look at the wrong side of that same row. Here we also have the V that goes into the stitch below, but then we have these other bumps. You got kind of a bump here and a bump here, and then you still have the top of the stitch, but you're not seeing it as much. You have to kind of tilt it towards you to see the top of the stitch, or the top of the post. The entire post, whether you're looking at the right side or the wrong side, is pretty easy to count. So I usually count the posts instead of counting individual stitches. So as I look at this piece, I can see those individual posts. This yarn is pretty easy to see the stitches. Sometimes you have a fuzzier yarn that's a little bit harder to see, or your stitches might be closer together, so it's a little harder to see the posts. To get a really good measurement of gauge, you want to make a swatch that's plenty big. This swatch is about 8 inches square. You don't have to make one quite that big, but I really recommend that you make one at least 6 inches square because you want to be able to measure the inside. We're not going to be measuring from edge to edge, just measuring the inside part of it. Block your swatch appropriately for your fabric. This is wool, but if you're using acrylic, you can also block acrylic. Just make sure you do it in a method that's appropriate for your fabric. Once you've made your swatch and blocked it and let it dry, put it down on a flat surface. Now don't put it on your lap or the sofa cushion. Don't stretch it out, just let it lie naturally. So I'm just going to let it lie naturally. I have blocked this already, so you see it's not very curly or anything. Then I want you to use a ruler, not a tape measure. Tape measures are nice, but you know what? You have to hold both ends, and then what are you going to count, and what if it slips a little bit? With a ruler, I can just put it down on top of my fabric and count with the ruler. Now, this ruler is a nice ruler because it's a little longer than the 0 mark. So you can see right here, the measurement starts here, not at the end of the ruler. If your ruler doesn't have a little space before this first mark, I recommend measuring from the 1 to the 5-inch mark. That's still 4 inches. You're just measuring from here to here. Don't think you're measuring 5 inches. But on this ruler, I can start here because I've got a little extra space here. So I know that that really is an accurate 1 inch. Put the ruler down with the 0 point at the very edge of a stitch. I recognize what a stitch is. I'm going to put it down right there and then count to the 4-inch mark. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And it looks to me like that 4-inch mark is pretty much right centered in between those two stitches. So I'm content with that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 double crochets equal 4 inches. I'm pretty happy with that, but I'm not going to trust it for the entire swatch. I want to measure somewhere else. So I'm going to move my ruler and put it over here and see if I get the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And again, I think that 4-inch mark is coming right up here between the stitches. So I'm pretty happy with that. And I've gotten the same reading twice. Let me do it one more time. I'm going to come over here and see what happens. I don't want to go all the way to the edge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. If you look really carefully, I can see that that 4-inch mark is coming over into this other stitch. So it's like 12 and some fraction of a 13th stitch. So I got 12, 12, and 12 point something. That makes me a little bit concerned. Maybe I'll measure one more time. Let's see what I get over here. Maybe I should measure a wrong side row. I'll count here. This time I'm going to count going this way just for fun. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And here I think that's right there. There's a space there. So I'm pretty confident that the average is 12 double crochets equals 4 inches. There was one of my readings was a little off, but I'm going to call it 12 double crochets equals 4 inches. When you're talking about gauge, you always have to have both the number of stitches or rows and the measurement, because it's not always 4 inches. Here I have a different swatch. It's the same yarn, but I did it with a different size hook. On this one, I'm going to measure the same way and show you what can happen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and oh my goodness, do you see that the 4-inch mark is just splitting that stitch? Well, I'm not comfortable guessing whether that's a half a stitch, a quarter of a stitch, a third of the stitch, whatever. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going and looking to see if there's a place where a marker on the ruler, ends between stitches. And I think this 5-inch mark right here is a really good spot. That's right between stitches as far as I can tell. I'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 stitches equals 5 inches. So I'm giving the number of stitches and the number of inches. It could have been 4.5, it could have been 5 1/4, whatever. So I would do that multiple times just to check my gauge, but it doesn't always have to be over 4 inches. Instead, go until you can count an entire stitch rather than trying to guess what that fraction is. That will make your measurements much more accurate. Back to my original swatch where I had measured 12 double crochets equals 4 inches. There's another part of gauge I haven't done yet, and that is the row gauge. We've talked about recognizing stitches, but let's talk about recognizing rows. This is a reversible fabric. I have right side rows and wrong side rows. Here's a right side row. Here's that bumpy wrong side row. Here's a right side row. There's the bumpy wrong side row. You'll notice that it actually, you can kind of see every 2 rows. You're seeing the base of the wrong side row here. So if I want to, I can count by 2s, or I can count the posts or whatever. So I can count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15 rows on this swatch if I want to, because I'm counting right side rows and wrong side rows. Those posts make it really easy to see. I put my zero point of my ruler here, and then come down here and see if I can count full rows. This is maybe a little bit trickier, and it can be harder to measure row gauge sometimes, but I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's pretty close to being right between, but maybe not. I think I've got a little bit of that 9th row in this 4 inches. So I'm going to say 9, 10. That may be more like 10 rows equals 5 inches. And I'll do that in several places to accurately get a row gauge. Again, the row gauge needs to give both the number of rows and the distance along with whatever stitch pattern you're doing. I mentioned that I like to use a ruler rather than a tape measure. Some of you may have a needle gauge like this that has this little window in it, and I'm showing just the back side of it right now, but I have a love-hate relationship with these. I think they're good in that they encourage you to think about gauge, but they're also a terrible tool because it is encouraging you, first of all, to only measure 2 inches, which is going to be terribly inaccurate compared to 4 inches. All right, so measuring over 4 inches, at least 4 inches, is much more accurate. The other thing a window like this does, and there are many different tools that have windows, is it covers up the stitch. So when I put this down, I can't see if I have got the entire stitch, or if I put it down here, see how there's a piece of a stitch over here? I don't know how much of a stitch that is. So it's covering up. I can't tell if I've got the whole row in here. So it's actually hiding information from you rather than giving you information. If this tool reminds you to measure your gauge, that's awesome. But once it's reminded you to measure your gauge, take a regular old-fashioned ruler and use that to measure your gauge. Another thing you need to know about gauge is it is dependent on the hook you're using, not just the hook size, but the actual type and brand of hook. So one style of hook that's the same size as another, those 2 hooks could give you a different gauge. There's a lot to know about gauge, but hopefully this will get you started on your way to measuring gauge and double crochet.
If you'd like more instruction like this, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Check out the links in the video notes for more ways you can find me. Thanks for watching.